Well, hello everyone. We should be live on Facebook now. Hello, welcome to another installment of our Understanding Nature series. And today, I'm Tim. Hang on, I'm trying to see my computer controls here. I'm Tim, I'm an educator here at Fontenelle Forest. And today I'm going to be talking about invertebrates. So kind of specifically, I'm going to be talking about kind of those invertebrates that we consider to be bugs. I'm going to call up my chat window real quick here so I can see if anything is going on. Because we're going to focus on some of these critters that we call bugs, because really the word invertebrate covers a lot of area. An invertebrate is any animal that lacks a backbone. So that could be insects, spiders, arthropods, and we're going to talk about some arthropods later. But it also covers other things, a lot of sea creatures like jellyfish. It covers shrimp, crabs, lobster. These are all invertebrates, and also scorpions and things like that. So what are we talking about when we talk about insects? Let's start with them. We can get my slideshow to work. There we go. What's an insect? So first of all, insects are the largest group in the animal kingdom. So there are over 900,000 identified insects in the animal kingdom known to science, and that's about 80% of all species on the planet. So there's a lot of insects out there. So if you don't like insects, that's a problem. The other thing you should know about insects is that's just a fraction. That 900,000 is just a fraction of what scientists think is out there in the insect kingdom. There are estimates anywhere between 2 and 30 million insect species total. So that would mean that 900,000 at best is a little less than half. And if there's 30 million species, well, then it's just a tiny fraction. So these are the parts of an insect. This is how you can identify an insect. An insect is an arthropod. All insects are arthropods. Not all arthropods are insects. They have an exoskeleton, so they have a hard shell. They have compound eyes, a segmented body, so their body is divided into the head, the thorax, and the abdomen. And they have 3 pair or 6 legs. So they also have antenna and external mouth parts, but there are exceptions to that. Most insects have antenna and external mouth parts. Not all of them do. There's always exceptions. But in general, the head contains the mouth part, the antenna, mouth parts, the antenna, and the eyes. The thorax here in the middle is where the legs are attached and the muscles for movement. And if it has wings, then the wings are attached there too. And then the abdomen contains the vital organs for digestion and reproduction. Now, mouth parts are going to vary depending on diet. So butterflies, moths, they have a proboscis. They have this tube-like structure for mouth parts, so they can suck that nectar. Ants, on the other hand, are going to have mandibles. They grab things, or they cut leaves, or they eat other insects. Antenna can be either segmented or feathery. A lot of moths have, or most moths have feathery antenna. And that can be a good clue for identification. If you're not sure what the insect is, whether it has segmented antenna or feathery antenna can be a good clue for identification. And antennae are kind of like the insect's ears. So they use those to sense sounds, vibrations, and a lot of times other environmental factors. Eyes can be simple and just have one lens, or they can be complex and have many, many lenses, like you see here in this bottom right corner and this upper right corner. And some insects have both, so they can have both types of eyes. The thorax, the wings and the legs. So all insect legs have 5 parts, but they're going to differ, kind of like the mouth parts, they're going to differ based on habitat. So grasshoppers, they have legs that are specialized for jumping. Bees have legs that have sacs, and you can see in this picture, to carry pollen. So they can store pollen in those sacs to carry it back to the hive. Wings, if they have wings, they're going to differ in shape and size. And this can also be a good clue for identification. So butterflies' wings are made of overlapping scales, and when they're at rest, they hold them vertically, like you see with our monarch here. Whereas a moth, on the other hand, is going to hold their wings horizontally. So that's one good way to tell the difference between a moth and a butterfly, is how do they hold their wings when they're at rest. Beetles, like our lightning bug here, and we're going to talk a little more about lightning bugs shortly, they're going to hold their wings flat against their body. And beetles have these elytra, or these hard kind of coverings that cover their wings. Now their abdomen, that's just used for digestion and reproduction. And these bugs are making little bugs. So now I know a lot of people consider insects to be yucky or creepy or things like that, but not all of them. So when is a fly not a fly? Well, when it's a firefly. So I'm going to start out looking at some familiar insects, some ones that you might not consider creepy and yucky. And hopefully I can surprise you with maybe some things you didn't know. And I bet I can surprise you here with some firefly facts. So also known as lightning bugs. I grew up calling them lightning bugs. Some people call them fireflies. And I love catching lightning bugs. I love the early summer when my kids want to go out and catch lightning bugs in the yard. And there's hundreds of different species of lightning bugs. So lightning bug or firefly, that's not one insect. That's kind of an umbrella term that covers many, many different species of lightning bugs. But it's a small, harmless beetle, and the light they create with their abdomen is caused by chemicals that they produce in their body, and when they're combined with oxygen, they phosphoresce or light up. Now, like I said, there's many different species, but each species has its own unique pattern of flashing. So and that lets them differentiate. They have different timing patterns, different flight patterns, that they'll fly, and some fly in a J shape while they're flashing. and the ones that are flying around flashing, those are usually the males, because they fly around flashing, and the female sits and watches and looks for one that impresses her. And when she's impressed, she'll flash back. Now, after mating, the female will lay the eggs in soil or leaf litter, and the larva, so the eggs will hatch in a few weeks, and the larva will burrow underground. And that's what you see here in this upper right corner. That's a firefly larva, and that's known as a glowworm because they can phosphoresce too. They can light up. And they spend 1 to 2 years or so living underground as a larva. They eat snails and slugs and worms and other insects. And then in the late spring, they'll pupate. They'll build a cocoon, and after 1 to 3 weeks in that cocoon, they'll emerge as an adult. Now, some adult fireflies will eat other insects. Some don't eat at all. Some are not known to eat. There's one species that mimics the patterns of other fireflies in order to lure the males in and eat them. Not very nice, but I guess it works for them. And fireflies only live 3 to 4 weeks as adults. So I saw a lot of fireflies about a month ago, but they're pretty much gone now, and I'm not seeing any. Whoa, sorry, didn't mean to do that. Now, lightning bugs, sorry, I wasn't done with lightning bugs. They taste nasty to predators, and they can actually, some predators, they can be poisonous too. So when they're attacked, they engage in a process called reflexive bleeding, where they shed some drops of blood. That blood contains some bitter chemicals, and those chemicals can actually be poisonous to some vertebrates, some lizards and some species of bird. All right, so dragonflies and damselflies. These are neat. We love to see these flying around, don't we? Now, dragonflies and damselflies are not the same thing. So oftentimes we call them both dragonflies, but they're actually different species. And dragonflies were some of the first winged insects to evolve. They evolved around 300 million years ago. So they've been around a while. Now you'll be happy to know that they've grown smaller over the last 300 million years. So modern dragonflies, even the largest ones, have a wingspan of only a few inches, but there are fossils that have been found that have wingspans of over 2 feet. So can you imagine a dragonfly coming at you with a 2-foot wingspan? That would be a little unsettling. Now, like I said, they're closely related, but let's look at some differences. Here on the top, we have a dragonfly, and on the bottom down here, we have a damselfly. So the dragonfly has a much thicker body. The damselfly has this very thin body. The dragonfly has hind wings, back wings that are thicker than the front wings. And when they're at rest, so again, another identification feature, when they're at rest, they hold their wings horizontally, whereas the damselfly holds theirs vertically. Now, in a lot of other ways, they're very similar. They both lay eggs in or near water. They're both predatory, so they eat other insects, eat mostly flying insects like mosquitoes. So we like them for that reason. They eat a lot of mosquitoes. Their head is almost all eye. So about 80% of their brain is dedicated to vision. So they have those compound eyes. Now here's the life cycle. When they mate, and sometimes they'll land to mate, sometimes they mate in flight. The female will lay her eggs in water. When the larvae emerge, they're what's called a nymph or a naiad, and that's the larva. And they can live up to 5 years in this stage as a nymph or a naiad. Now, when they're ready for their final molt, they crawl out of the water and they shed this exoskeleton that they had as a nymph. And it's almost like a cicada shell. If you're familiar with cicada shells, you can find dragonfly larva shells near water oftentimes. So when they emerge, they're that dragonfly or damselfly. And their flying stage lasts between a week and 9 months. So really, once you see them flying around, and this is pretty common in the insect world, once you see them flying around, that's the end of their life cycle. So they're pretty much looking to mate and lay eggs, and then they're going to die. Now, dragonfly flight is pretty amazing. So like I said earlier, an insect's legs are kind of specialized for their habitat, and dragonflies are no exception. They only use their legs for pushing off to take flight and to catch prey. A dragonfly can't actually walk, and damselfly too. So their wings beat asynchronously, so they don't flap together kind of the way a bird's does, but each wing moves independently. And this allows them to save energy because the back wings get a rush of air from the front wings and they don't have to work quite as hard. And that asynchronous beating also lets them be very, very agile flyers. They can fly forwards, backwards, they can go straight up, straight down, and they can hover. And they catch their prey in flight, and they can also mate in flight. Now, the average speed of a dragonfly is about 9 miles an hour, but some of the larger species can reach anywhere between 20 to 35 miles an hour. So pretty amazing how quickly they can fly. So praying mantis. These guys are not native. They were discovered in the United States around 1899, so the end of the 1800s, beginning of the 1900s, and they came over from Europe. Now the female is generally larger than the male, and even though she has wings, the females generally don't fly. She's too large, her body is too heavy for her wings to get enough lift. When threatened, she'll raise her arms and she'll spread her wings, and that helps her look more imposing. Now, the male has wings also, and he can and does fly. He'll go fly around and look for a mate. They have binocular vision. Their eyes can look in different directions, and they have this small dot. They have compound eyes, but they have this small dot that looks like a pupil, and it's actually called a pseudopupil. So the female is known for biting the head off the male during mating. That doesn't hinder his performance, that actually enhances it. She doesn't always do that. So that's a little bit of a myth that the female always kills the male, always bites his head off. She doesn't always do it, but she does frequently enough. They lay eggs in the fall on a twig, and they cover it with this hard foam, kind of. That hard foam will help deter predators like birds, and it also helps retain moisture because the young or the eggs will overwinter in that egg case. Now, in the spring, they'll hatch out of there, and the little baby praying mantis that come out of there actually look just like the full-grown adults, but they're tiny. They're only maybe about an inch tall. And they'll start to eat insects. Sometimes they'll eat each other, but they're great to have in your garden. So they will eat a lot of pest species in your garden, help keep your garden pest free. Now here's another one that I'm sure you're probably hearing them now. I am, and I'm sitting outside, so you might actually be able to hear a lot of the cicadas in my trees here. So they're often seen or heard during the warmest parts of the summer. And there's actually one of the main species is called the dog day cicadas. So you hear them and see them during the dog days of summer. And it's a familiar sound. It's quite loud. So it kind of sounds like a buzz saw. Here's another one. So that's a familiar sound in the summertime. Now, adult cicadas are not known to eat. So they don't cause plant damage by eating. I was just reading this morning an article on the periodic cicada, and they can damage trees with their egg laying, because when the female lays eggs, she chooses a pencil size twig on a tree, and she has a very sharp, what's called an ovipositor, and she jams it in there and lays her eggs, and that can cause some damage to the trees. After they lay eggs, they die. So again, this flying stage, when these cicadas emerge, and they're in this flying stage, that's the end of their life cycle. So when the larvae hatch, they drop off the tree and they actually burrow into the earth. Dog day cicadas spend about 3 years underground before they emerge, and they kind of emerge every year. There's dog day cicadas that emerge every year. Periodic cicadas kind of come in waves, and there's actually a 13-year and a 17-year cicada, and nobody really knows why 13 years and 17 years, but their larvae will wait for about 17 years, and they actually come in what's called a brood. So when that brood hatches, and I think we're anticipating either brood 9 or 10 is what they call it. So I think some of that was anticipated this year. I'm not sure if it came everywhere, because I read articles that say it's coming around next year for parts of the East, Pennsylvania, West Virginia, Virginia, kind of that region. Now, when they come out in very large numbers. So there can be millions per acre when these periodic cicada broods emerge. So it's really kind of a big event. And when they come out in those kind of numbers, then their egg laying can cause some damage to the trees. But for the most part, like I said, the adults don't eat. You'll find these shells here from when they emerge. You'll find those empty shells. My kids loved to, when they were smaller, they loved to collect these. We had buckets and buckets full of them. They do serve as food for other animals. A lot of raccoons will eat them, birds, things like that. Now, along with cicadas, you get this, the cicada killer wasp. Now that looks like a scary, scary wasp. That's a big, striped, seemingly stinging insect. But they're actually not as scary as they look. So they're not aggressive to humans. They can sting if you handle them roughly. Now, I don't know about you, but I'm not about to grab anything that looks like that. So the chances of me getting stung by a cicada killer wasp are going to be pretty small. The adults actually drink nectar, but the females will burrow into the ground, and sometimes the females will work together to make a burrow in the ground, and then they'll lay eggs in the tunnels. And they'll go out and they'll catch a cicada in flight. They'll sting it to immobilize it. They'll bring it back to that den, and then that cicada serves as food for their larvae. So you might see these flying into a burrow in the ground. I would just leave them be, because they're actually, they're not harmful, and they drink nectar, they pollinate things. So they're probably pretty beneficial. Now these little guys are assassin bugs. This one here is also known as a wheel bug because it's got this wheel looking protrusion on its back. And they're named for the fang that they use. You can see in these two pictures, especially right here in this upper left corner and this bottom right corner. That's a fang, and they keep that tucked when it's not in use, but they use that to stab their prey. They hunt on plants. And if you were to grab one of these, you could get a painful sting. I had never seen one of these. The first time I saw one, I picked it up. My kids wanted to hold it. I gave it to them. We put it down. We got away with it. I looked it up later and read this very thing. Oh, this can inflict a painful sting. Yee. glad that didn't happen to me or the kids. But like I said, they do hunt on plants. They'll surprise their prey. They'll hold it down with their strong front legs, and then they'll stab it with that fang. They use that to inject digestive enzymes, and then they slurp that up. Sounds gross, but again, it's good for your garden. You know, if you have pests in your garden, aphids and things that will eat your plants, these assassin bugs will go in there and help reduce the populations of those bugs. In fact, there's a bug called the brown marmorated stink bug, which is an invasive pest. And they're very good at controlling those. In fact, in places where you see high numbers of stink bugs, you see higher numbers of these wheel bugs because they'll prey on them. So when is an ant not an ant? Because that looks an awful lot like an ant. Well, when it's a velvet ant. So the velvet ant, also known as the cow killer, is an ant mimic. So it looks like an ant, but it's actually a wingless wasp. Well, the female is a wingless wasp. The male actually has wings and flies around, but this is the female. So the sting of the cow killer or velvet ant is said to be the 4th most painful insect sting in the world. So that's how it got the nickname cow killer. It was said that its sting was so painful it could kill a cow. Now, I haven't gone out and tested this theory, and I'm not about to. There is, if you look on YouTube, there's a guy that lets himself get stung by different things to show how painful they are. And there's actually a very interesting video of him letting himself get stung by a velvet ant. Now they look fuzzy, but they actually have a very tough exoskeleton. And people who mount insects, you know, with the little pins, they say it's actually very tough to pin them because their exoskeleton is so hard. The female will dig into the nests of other ground nesting wasps and bees, and then they lay eggs on the larvae of those wasps and bees. So they lay eggs on the wasp and bee larvae. When the velvet ant larvae emerge, they'll eat those hosts, and then spin their cocoons inside the host's pupal case. So kind of interesting, not very nice. Now this is a scary looking bug that's not scary too. This is a stag beetle. Here on the left, on this left-hand picture, the one with the big mandibles, that's the male. The one with the smaller mandibles is the female. Now, in spite of those giant mandibles and looking so ferocious, they're actually very mellow. They're nocturnal, so they're attracted to light. Sometimes you'll find them outside if you have a porch light on or something like that. The large mandibles of the male are actually mostly ornamental. They use them for male-to-male combat, and the winner of that fight gets to mate with the female. They actually live on sap. These stag beetles live underground, and they'll kind of bite into a tree root, and it doesn't hurt the tree, but they'll suck out some of that sap. The female lays eggs on a dead tree or in a stump, and the grubs mature in rotting wood. So if you ever, pull apart a rotting piece of wood in the forest and you find a grub in there, there's a good chance it's a stag beetle grub. Now I like this beetle because it's one of the rarest insects in the world, and it lives right here in Nebraska. So this is the Salt Creek tiger beetle. So it's known to occur only in a few locations in Lancaster and Saunders County, which is just north of Lincoln. And you can see on the map here, I've circled those little orange specks just to show you that's the extent of the Salt Creek tiger beetle range. Now, historically, the Salt Creek tiger beetle's range covered large areas in that area of Nebraska. So they require saline mudflats and exposed banks with salt deposits in order to forage and feed, reproduce, and overwinter. It spends most of its life underground as a larva, which is kind of a recurring theme here with our insects. Now, I don't know if you've noticed, maybe you have, but saltwater and Nebraska don't exactly go together. You don't exactly think of Nebraska as being a big place for salt water. And it's not. It's nowhere near an ocean or a large body of salt water, right? So these salt deposits were left behind about 60 million years ago. So the Western Interior Seaway used to cover most of Nebraska. And when it retreated and when it evaporated, it left these salt deposits behind. And the salt deposits were so extensive that at one point, J.P. Morton of the Morton Salt Company actually tried mining salt from this area. So since the 1800s, these saline wetlands have been lost. A lot of them have been lost due to the development of Lincoln, levees that were constructed to control flooding, draining and filling these saline wetlands for development. So presently there's about 15 acres, so that's about the size of 15 football fields, 15 acres of suitable habitat for the Salt Creek tiger beetle. Now this is another interesting beetle, and this is another endangered species here in Nebraska and across the nation. And this is the American burying beetle. They feed on carrion, which sounds kind of gross, but it's very important for the ecosystem. It helps recycle those nutrients back into the ecosystem. And they're one of the largest beetles in Nebraska. They can get up to about 2 inches. Now, you can see here on this map, this was the extent of their range, all this kind of pinkish color. Right now, they are limited to just these green areas. Now, what I find interesting about the American burying beetle is that they decline was due to habitat loss, which is pretty common. As we develop things, we use up a lot of habitat for other animals and insects. But one of the primary causes of the American burying beetle decline was light pollution. They require large areas free from people and not a lot of light. They like it dark. So they are one of the few insects that provide parental care to their larvae. So the mated pair will find a suitable carcass. Sometimes they have to battle other mated pairs. The winner gets to keep the carcass, usually about the size of a squirrel, so not a huge carcass, but a smaller one, and they'll bury it, and they'll coat it in a substance that will slow its decomposition down, and they lay their eggs there. Now, when the eggs hatch, they will start eating that carcass. The parents will help feed and protect the larvae until they pupate, and that's pretty unusual in insect species. All right, well, let's talk about arthropods. So like I said earlier, all insects are arthropods, but not all arthropods are insects. So arthropods still have a segmented body. They still have paired jointed limbs and exoskeletons. So they're similar to insects in that way. But some examples of arthropods that are not insects are arachnids. So are spiders and other arachnids, and myriapods like centipedes and millipedes, and scorpions. Now, if you joined me for my spider program a few month or so ago, then some of this will be familiar. So we're going to talk a little bit about spiders. Spiders have 4 pairs of legs, so they have 8 legs, which is different from our insect that only has 6. 2 body segments versus 3, so they have a cephalothorax and an abdomen. No wings or antenna, which is good. Flying spiders, you know, 2020 has been interesting. Hopefully flying spiders aren't on the docket for later this year or next year. They all have fangs, or what we call pedipalps, and they all produce some sort of venom. Now that venom may or may not be harmful to humans. So only a handful of spiders actually have a venom that will affect people. And all spiders produce silk, and they can actually produce up to 7 kinds of silk for different purposes. So some common spiders of Nebraska, we have wolf spiders, you see here. Wolf spiders they don't build a web. They actually will produce an egg sac, and they'll carry it around under their abdomen. And then when the young hatch, they'll climb up on the mother's back, and she'll carry them around on her back. Here we do have one of our poisonous, or sorry, I should say venomous spiders. Poison you ingest, venom gets injected. So the black widow, and they produce a spatial type web. And then here you see orb weavers, and orb weavers are the kind of spider that make the kind of traditional round spider webs. So when a spider builds an orb like this, they start out by floating a line across on called a bridge line. They'll float it across on an air current. They'll strengthen that, and then they'll form kind of a Y-shaped framework, and then they'll start building the frame around the outside. Then they put in the radial support lines, so kind of the spokes of that wheel. And once they're done, they'll build a lot of times they'll build a framework spiral with large gaps, and that's using non-sticky webbing. And then they'll come back and put in the sticky, what we call the capture spiral, that sticky web, and they'll work their way back to the inside. And they'll attach it at each of these radial points. They'll attach that sticky spiral. And they do this every night. So I actually have 2 or 3 orb weavers that like to build their webs on my chicken coop at night. And my daughter and I we stood and watched one for about 10 minutes the other night. And it had made the framework and had put in all the radials. And when we went out to secure the chicken coop, we saw it going around, and you could watch it attach that spiral at each of these radial points. It's fascinating to watch. Now, when is a spider not a spider? Well, when it's an eastern harvestman. So these are pretty common at Fontenelle Forest. You know, eastern harvestman, also called the daddy longlegs. Now, a daddy longlegs is an arachnid, so it is related to spiders, but it's not a spider. So they're actually more closely related to ticks and mites. Now, sometimes you'll see like a story going around if you're on Facebook. Sometimes just somebody will share this. Did you know that a daddy longlegs has the most potent venom in the world, but their fangs are too weak to break human skin? But if they had stronger fangs, you know, their one drop of their venom would kill you or something like that. Now that is a complete and total and utter myth. So eastern harvestmen don't have fangs. They don't produce venom. So none of that is true. So like I said, they're related to spiders, but spiders have that distinct abdomen and cephalothorax, those two body segments. The eastern harvestman just has this one fused round body segment. So spiders have 3 to 4 pairs of eyes. The daddy longlegs just has 2 eyes. And the daddy longlegs, in addition to not having fangs or silk glands, they don't have, or fangs or sorry, venom, they don't have silk glands. They don't produce any kind of web. So their second pair of legs, which they do use somewhat as legs, but they're actually more like antennae. So they use those to smell the world. They breathe through small holes on those legs. Those are called spiracles. Sorry, I had a bee flying around me. Now, as a defense mechanism, they can actually remove one of their legs and it'll twitch for up to an hour, which I find fascinating. So that leg can twitch for up to an hour to kind of distract that predator. But if it loses one of these second leg pairs, then it'll die because it will actually suffocate because it can't breathe. Now, pill bugs, or roly-polies, and sow bugs. So these are isopods. So they're actually more closely related to crustaceans like shrimp and lobster. And our marketing person, Dana, asked me one day, she said, she heard that pill bugs taste like shrimp if you eat them. Now, I haven't gone out and tried this. I don't know if any of you have. If you have, shoot me an email, tohara@fontenelleforest.org. I would love to hear if you've eaten pill bugs or sow bugs. I'm not telling you to go do it. That's a disclaimer. But if you have, or if you feel the inclination, let me know. Now, these need to live in moist habitats because they breathe through gill-like structures on their underside. So that's why you'll find them under rocks and logs and damp places like that. I find them in my compost pile a lot because it's damp. Now, I used to think that sow bug was just another name for a pill bug, that they were the same thing, but they're actually 2 distinct types of isopods. So the way to tell them apart, pill bugs, when they're threatened, they'll roll up like a pill, just like on this bottom picture. Sow bugs do not roll up. Sow bugs have 2 tail-like appendages here on their backside, and they also have a second set of antennae, but they're very small. They can be very hard to see. Now, they're considered primitive, but they have a very important role in the ecosystem. So they eat rotting material. So part of that nutrient cycle, decomposing some of that rotten wood and leaves and things like that. They're also food for other insects and spiders. So they're important in that way. Now, the female can reproduce through what's called parthenogenesis. That means she doesn't need a male necessarily to reproduce and make young. Now, most of the time a male is involved, but he's not necessary. So she'll lay eggs, and in between 3 and 9 weeks, those eggs will hatch about 2 dozen offspring. And they'll spend anywhere from 3 to 9 days in a pouch on their mom's underside, kind of in those scales. So she can have 2 to 3 broods a year. The young will molt 4 to 5 times until they're mature, which is usually within a year. And they actually molt in 2 stages. So first they'll molt the back part of their exoskeleton. And then a couple of days later, they'll molt the front part. Now they're very vulnerable during that time, so they tend to kind of keep isolated. Now the last thing I'm going to talk about is one of my favorites, the American giant millipede, also known as the iron worm. So in these two pictures, they get up to about 4 inches long, and they curl up like this to protect their belly and legs when they're threatened. And these two pictures are actually ones that I took. So this is on the right here, that's my hand. And this on the left is my daughter's hand. So they're generally nocturnal. Sometimes you'll see them out during the day, but generally they come out at night. And they can actually release a noxious liquid. It's brown and it tastes bad if you're a predator, and it can also irritate your eyes and skin. So I actually saw one of these one morning. I was coming into work and saw one of these in the parking lot, and there was a gentleman there with 2 young boys, and I said, "Hey guys, you want to see something cool?" And I picked it up and let it crawl in my hand and showed them, and then I set it down, and one of the little boys grabbed it, and then he went, "Ah!" He dropped it again, and his hand was all covered in that brown liquid. So if you're rough with them, they can secrete that. Now, again, they're scavengers. They eat damp and decaying wood and plant material. Now, if their environment dries out, because they need a moist habitat too, they breathe through spiracles on their sides. So if their environment dries out, they may start to eat living plant material, but most of the time they'll be underneath logs and things like that. Now the male, to differentiate the male from the female, the male is missing his 7th pair of legs. Now I'm just saying, I've caught quite a few of these, and if you can count where the 7th pair of legs are and see if they're missing, you're a better person than I am, because I could never tell. The female will lay eggs in mounds of her own feces, so she kind of lays eggs in her poop to keep them warm. Newly hatched millipedes are tiny. They have 3 pairs of legs, so they only have 6 legs, and they'll have 7 body segments. Now with each molt, they add segments and body segments. Now the difference between a millipede and a centipede is that a millipede has 2 pairs of legs for each segment. So when a young one molts and it adds a segment, it's adding 4 legs. A centipede, on the other hand, has 1 pair of legs, or 2 legs per segment. Now they don't get up to 1 million legs. You know, usually we think centipedes, oh, they have 100 legs, and millipedes have 1 million legs. They don't get quite that high. Most, on average, have less than 50 pairs of legs, so less than 100 legs. But larger ones can have several hundred pairs of legs, or several hundred legs. The record for a millipede is 375 pairs of legs. Now they look really cool when they walk, which is one of my favorite things about them. So I love how it just looks like a wave. There's something soothing about that. Well, all right, that's all I have for you today. For a catalog of topics or information on pricing, or if you want to book a program like this one for your private group, you know, give me a call, shoot me an email. We want to thank our Centennial sponsors. Because of COVID, we weren't able to hold our annual fundraiser this year. And these are the people and the foundations and the companies that generously donated, that allow us to continue bringing programming to you during the quarantine. So if you have any questions, look up the video on Facebook, and you can shoot me you can leave me a message in there. I think I have, let's see if I have one in the chat. What is my favorite type of scorpion? My 6-year-old is asking. I don't think I have a favorite type of scorpion, but I know some of them glow under black light, and that's pretty cool. So if I could find one like that, that would probably be my favorite. So if you have any other questions, post them on Facebook. I'll check the Facebook post later to see if there's any questions, and I'll get on and answer those. And again, I want to thank you for tuning in. We appreciate all your support. The forest is now open with some restrictions, so get out to the forest and everybody stay healthy.